Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. The night was thick, almost suffocating. It had that feeling, you know the one, when the air presses against your chest, and every streetlight seems like it's just a little too dim, like it's barely holding back the dark. I was behind the wheel, doing what I've done for years, driving through the city, picking up passengers, shuttling them from one place to another. It was just another night, or so I thought. I'd been driving for 20 years, and nothing fazed me anymore. I'd seen everything, the drunks, the lovers arguing, the lost souls who would tell me their problems like I was their therapist. I've heard it all, seen it all. But tonight, there was something different. Something about the air felt wrong. Maybe it was the rain, beating relentlessly against the windshield, or the fact that the streets were so empty, too empty for a city this size. I passed through the quieter parts of town, where the streetlights flickered like dying fireflies, casting long shadows that stretched across the road. The rain seemed to turn everything into a smear of shadows and neon, like the city was losing its shape. It was in those moments, those quiet, empty moments, that I began to feel the unease creeping up on me. It started small, just a knot in my stomach, but it grew, tightening with every corner I turned, every empty street I passed. Then I saw her. She was standing on the curb under a flickering street lamp, as if she'd stepped out of the shadows themselves. A woman, pale, almost ghostly in the rain-soaked night. I almost kept driving. I've passed plenty of people like her before, standing in the cold, waiting for someone who would never come. But this felt different. There was something about her, something that made me slow down. Maybe it was the way she stood, so still, like she wasn't even part of this world. Her clothes were old, tattered, as if they belonged to a time long past. She raised her hand, almost too deliberately, as if she were calling me. Not with words, but with something else. A pull, a need. And I responded. I don't know why. I slowed the car, pulling up to the curb. The rain had started to pick up, pounding against the roof like it was angry. She opened the door before I could even roll down the window. A chill swept through the cab as she slid in. The moment she did, the air inside the car turned cold, and I could feel it on the back of my neck, like the warmth had been sucked out of the world. She didn't say a word, didn't even acknowledge me as I glanced in the rearview mirror. Her eyes, they were empty, hollow, like she was staring right through me. I had to force myself to keep my hands on the wheel. Something wasn't right. Where to? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The silence between us felt suffocating, like something pressing down on me. She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me a crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it and my brow furrowed. The address written on it, the place she wanted to go, was familiar in the worst way. It was an old part of town, long abandoned. The kind of place people forget about or run from. A place that had been overtaken by time, left to rot. Nobody went there anymore. Hell, I hadn't thought about it in years. I glanced up at her again through the mirror. She was still staring, unblinking, and for a moment I wondered if she even knew how to speak. There was something unnatural about her, like she didn't belong in this world. I didn't question it. I just started the car. What else was I supposed to do? The rain beat down harder as I pulled back onto the road, the headlights cutting through the fog like two tiny beacons in an ocean of darkness. The city was melting away behind me, the streets growing emptier, quieter. As I drove, the sense of unease only grew stronger. I could feel her presence in the back seat, pressing on me, suffocating me. It wasn't just the silence. It was her. She wasn't just a passenger, she was something else. Something wrong. I tried to make small talk. You know, the usual stuff. Anything to break the tension. "Bad weather tonight," I said, glancing at her through the rear view. She didn't respond, didn't move. It was starting to get to me. The stillness, the way her eyes never left the mirror. They seemed to dig into me, like she could see something I couldn't. It felt like she was looking into my soul, and then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized it was a song. A soft, haunting melody. It was so faint, I almost couldn't make it out over the sound of the rain. But it was there, a faint, eerie tune that seemed to come from nowhere. "Do you hear it?" she asked, her voice so cold it sent a shiver down my spine. I swallowed hard. I hadn't heard anything. But the song, I could hear it now, clear as day. It was coming from the air around us, the car, the city itself. It felt wrong, like it was from a time that didn't belong to this world. I tried to shake it off, but the chill in the car wouldn't leave. It lingered in the air, a weight that pressed down on me, tightening with each mile. I glanced at the woman again. Her face hadn't changed. She was still staring at me through the mirror, but now her lips parted. "It's the song," she whispered. "The song that keeps me here." My heart raced. "What do you mean?" I muttered, more to myself than to her. I could barely keep my eyes on the road. But she didn't answer. She just stared, her empty eyes locked on mine, as the haunting melody grew louder, echoing in the back of my skull. Something was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it. My mind was screaming at me to turn around, to stop this ride before it was too late. But I didn't. I couldn't. I don't know why. Maybe I was too afraid to stop. Maybe I was already trapped. The city faded away behind us. The streets grew darker, emptier, and I felt it deep in my gut. Whatever was coming, whatever was waiting for us at the end of the road, it wasn't going to be good. And I had no choice but to keep driving. The rain was relentless. It wasn't the kind of rain you forget about. It was the kind that soaked into your bones, made the world outside blurry and cold, and trapped you in the humdrum of a long night. I'd been driving for years, picking up strangers and ferrying them through the city's quiet hours. But tonight, the night felt different. It had that strange heaviness to it, the kind that settles in your chest and doesn't let go. I couldn't shake it, no matter how much I tried. I was cruising down one of the quieter streets when I saw her, standing on the curb under the flickering light of a street lamp, almost ghostly in the rain. She looked out of place, her pale skin reflecting the cold light, the way her wet clothes clung to her frail body. She was motionless, as if waiting for something or someone. Something about her made my stomach twist, but I couldn't ignore her. I couldn't just drive on by like I usually did. I slowed the car, my tires splashing through the puddles. She raised her hand, and before I knew it, I was pulling over. I didn't want to. I knew something was wrong, something I couldn't put my finger on, but I did it anyway. She climbed into the back seat without saying a word. I barely had time to react. The moment the door closed behind her, the air in the cab seemed to shift. It wasn't the usual cold that comes with rain. No, this was something else. It was like a weight had dropped on my shoulders. The air turned thick, suffocating. I could feel it pressing against me from all sides. The silence between us wasn't the comfortable kind. It was heavy. I glanced in the rearview mirror, trying to get a better look at her. Her face was pale, almost too pale, and her eyes, they didn't seem to blink. They were too wide, too dark, like there was nothing behind them. It sent a shiver down my spine. There was something wrong. She wasn't just some lost traveler. No, this woman felt unnatural. I cleared my throat, trying to shake off the unease. "Where to?" I asked, though my voice didn't sound like my own. It was hollow, strained, like the words didn't want to come out. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. I took it from her, my fingers brushing against hers for a moment, and the touch, God, the touch, was like ice. Her skin was so cold, like it had never felt warmth. The paper was old, faded. The ink was smudged in places, like it had been written in a hurry by someone who couldn't stop shaking. I looked at the address, and my stomach dropped. I knew that street. I shouldn't have, but I did. It was an old part of town, forgotten, abandoned. No one went there anymore. I'd seen it on maps when I was younger, before it was left to rot. A place that the city had swallowed up, left behind, erased from memory. But I knew it. I knew it. And when I looked up at her again, her eyes were locked on mine through the rearview mirror. I couldn't breathe. There was something wrong about her, something that felt old. The silence thickened, pressing down on me like a weight in the pit of my stomach. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew it didn't matter. I wasn't really asking her. I was asking myself, and I already knew the answer. I put the car in gear and started driving. The rain was coming down harder now, the wipers struggling to keep up with the deluge. The city around me felt more distant, like it was dissolving into nothing. The streets became darker, emptier. The headlights of my car carved weak paths through the fog, illuminating only a few feet ahead. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her eyes remained fixed on me, cold, relentless. I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just a passenger. She was something else, something that didn't belong in this world. I couldn't place it, but the unease gnawed at me, creeping under my skin, making my heart race for reasons I couldn't explain. I tried to make small talk. You know, anything to fill the silence. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I thought if I said something, if I tried to act normal, it would make the tension go away. "Bad weather tonight?" I said, my voice shaky. She didn't respond. I glanced at her through the mirror again. Her eyes, those eyes never left me. It was as if she was staring into me, looking straight through me. I couldn't look away. There was something so empty about her. It was like I was talking to a shell, a ghost. And then, just as I was about to turn onto another street, I heard it. A sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but no, it was a song. A faint melody, like the softest whisper of a music box playing somewhere far away. I tried to ignore it, but it was there, clawing at the edges of my thoughts, growing louder with each passing second. It was a song that didn't belong. The kind of tune you hear in a nightmare, in some forgotten dream, in a place you can never quite reach. "Do you hear it?" she asked, her voice so cold it sent a chill straight through me. I barely registered her words, too lost in the sound. It was like the song was coming from inside the cab, filling the space between us, crawling into my ears. I looked at her. What is that?" My voice was barely a whisper, but it didn't matter. The music continued, getting louder, filling my mind, drowning out everything else. "It's the song," she said, her lips barely moving. "The song that keeps me here, Her words hit me like a cold wave. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I wanted to pull over, to stop this, to run, but I couldn't. My hands tightened on the wheel, and for the first time in years, I felt completely out of control. It was like the road had disappeared beneath me, like I was being pulled along, deeper into whatever dark, forgotten place she was leading me to. The rain beat harder against the windows, the sound of the wipers screeching in time with the melody that was now pounding in my ears. But it wasn't enough to drown out the feeling that I was no longer driving, that something else had taken over, that the woman wasn't just a passenger, she was guiding me, pulling me toward something ancient, something far darker than anything I had ever known, and I couldn't stop it, I couldn't stop her. The rain kept coming, unrelenting. It had that heavy, suffocating feel, the kind that wraps itself around your lungs and makes every breath harder to take. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, it was just another night, another shift behind the wheel. But something about tonight, something in the air, felt different. It wasn't just the weather, it was her. I didn't know why I stopped. I'd passed by people like her before, strangers, standing alone on the curb at God knows what hour of the night, waiting for something or someone. But this time, when I saw her standing under that flickering street lamp, I couldn't drive by. There was something about her that made me slow down, something that made my stomach turn in a way I couldn't explain. She climbed into the back seat without saying a word. Her movements were slow, too slow, deliberate in a way that made my skin crawl. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the air inside the car shifted. It wasn't just the chill from the rain, no, this was something different. It was like the warmth had been sucked out of the car, like the very air was heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't like anyone I'd ever picked up. Her eyes, those eyes, they never left me. They were dark, hollow, almost empty. And I'm not talking about tired, heavy eyes from a long day or a night of drinking. No, these were otherworldly eyes. I could feel them on me every second, boring into me like they were trying to read my soul. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror. She was still staring at me, unblinking, unwavering. "Where to?" I asked, my voice coming out shakier than I wanted it to. The silence in the car was suffocating, like it was closing in on me. I tried to ignore it, tried to act like everything was fine. She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me a crumpled piece of paper, its edges worn and frayed. I took it from her, my fingers brushing hers for a second, and I felt it, that coldness. A bone-deep cold that seeped through my skin. Her touch was like ice, freezing me to the core. I unfolded the paper. The address written there was wrong. I don't know how else to explain it. It was a place I knew, a place I shouldn't have remembered. It was an old street, long abandoned, a part of the city that had been left behind, erased from maps. There was no reason for anyone to go there anymore. I hadn't thought about that place in years. But as soon as I saw it, I felt the chill on the back of my neck, the hairs on my arms standing on end. I looked up at her again, my mind racing. I knew the place. I knew it. And in the back of my mind, something told me I shouldn't go there. Something told me I should turn the cab around, tell her to get out. But her eyes, those eyes, they were locked on mine. I couldn't look away, I don't know why. I nodded, my hands trembling slightly as I started the car. The rain hammered the roof in a steady rhythm, but the noise felt distant. The streets were empty, like the city itself was holding its breath. I tried to shake the growing sense of unease, but it clung to me like a shadow, creeping under my skin. The road ahead was swallowed by darkness, the streetlights growing fewer and farther between. The city was fading behind us, and with each mile it felt like we were leaving the world I knew behind. The place we were heading, that place, wasn't just forgotten. It was abandoned for a reason. I glanced in the rearview again. She was still there, staring at me, not moving. It was like she was a part of the car now, a part of the silence. The air felt thicker, colder, as though the very atmosphere was closing in on me. I tried to speak again, anything to break the suffocating quiet. "Bad weather tonight," I muttered, but the words felt hollow in my mouth, like they didn't belong to me. She didn't respond. Of course, she didn't. I glanced at her once more. Her eyes. God, those eyes. They were still on me, still locked on mine through the mirror. I couldn't look away. It was like they were pulling me in, deeper and deeper. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe the sound of the rain hitting the windows. But no, it was a song. A faint melody, drifting through the cab like it was coming from nowhere. It was so soft at first that I thought I was imagining it. But it wasn't just the rain, it was real. It was the kind of song you only hear in your nightmares. Slow, haunting, like the whisper of a music box someone had forgotten to wind. I didn't know what to do. My hands were sweating, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Do you hear it?" she whispered, her voice breaking the spell. The words came out cold, like they didn't belong to her, like she wasn't human anymore. I didn't answer, I couldn't. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The song was getting louder, but it wasn't coming from the radio. It wasn't even coming from outside the cab. It was inside my head now, like it was coming from deep within me. I turned to her, my breath caught in my throat. She didn't move, didn't speak again. But I could feel the weight of her gaze, even though she wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring straight ahead, her lips barely moving as she whispered, "It's the song that keeps me here." Her words settled in the air like smoke. My pulse was racing, my heart pounding in my chest. The road ahead was nothing but blackness, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. I couldn't breathe. The song kept playing. The haunting tune wrapped itself around my thoughts like a vice, tightening with every note. It wasn't just a song. It was a message, a call, a warning, and I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape her. The rain was falling harder now, the sound of it beating against the windows almost deafening. But I couldn't focus on the rain. I couldn't focus on anything except her and the song that wouldn't stop. I knew, deep down, that this was it. This was the moment. I had crossed the line, I had picked her up, and now there was no going back. The melody, her eyes, the heavy silence, everything felt wrong. And yet, I couldn't stop the car, I couldn't stop this ride, I was already too far gone, too deep in the night to turn back. And the song played on. The rain had stopped, but it wasn't a relief. No, it was more like the world had just paused, held its breath, waiting. The streets were unnervingly quiet, like the city had emptied itself out, leaving only the echo of its own existence. My headlights cut through the mist, throwing weak beams of light onto the road ahead, but they didn't seem to reach far enough. The darkness kept creeping in, swallowing everything in its path. And as I kept driving, I realized something. We weren't in the city anymore. I don't know why I hadn't noticed it earlier. The way the buildings had started to change. How they had gone from towering glass and steel to decaying skeletons of the past. Old brick buildings, their windows shattered, walls crumbling, and signs that hadn't been read in decades, now rusted and barely legible. We were in the forgotten part of town, the part where people stopped driving, where the city itself had decided to bury its past. I kept my eyes on the road, but I couldn't stop the growing dread gnawing at my insides. I knew this place. I had driven past it before, but I never stopped. No one did. It was like the city had swept it under the rug, buried it, as though pretending it never existed. And yet, here I was, driving through it, like I had been drawn into its forgotten heart, its dark, silent pulse. The woman in the back seat had not said a word since we left the main part of town. She hadn't even moved. She was there, silent, still, and yet so present. Her eyes locked on me in the rearview mirror. Her gaze never wavered, and I could feel it on me, in me. I didn't dare look at her directly. It was as if her presence was enough to stretch the silence between us, thickening it, making it more oppressive with every passing second. I tried to focus on the road, tried to ignore the strange tug in my chest, the sense of being pulled deeper into this God-forsaken place. The streets became narrower, the buildings taller, more imposing. They leaned toward the road like they were trying to crush me, like they wanted me to turn around, to leave. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop driving. Something wouldn't let me. And then it happened, that scraping sound. It was so faint at first I almost thought it was just the wind. But then it came again, louder this time. Scraping, dragging, like nails running across metal. It made my skin crawl. I slammed my foot on the brake, the tires screeching as the car lurched forward, my hands gripping the wheel like a lifeline. I was losing control. I had to stop. I couldn't keep going. But when I glanced out the window, all I saw was empty street. No one was there, no one, just darkness. My breath was coming faster now. I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't even sure if I was still in my body. I looked at the rearview mirror again, and that's when I saw it. She had moved, I swear to you. She hadn't moved when I glanced at her last. But now, she was there, so close. Her face was mere inches from mine, her cold, dead eyes staring at me with that same piercing intensity. I didn't want to look at her. I didn't want to see her. But I couldn't look away. She was closer now, closer than I thought possible in such a small space. The air had turned colder, the kind of cold that settles into your bones, that numbs your skin. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Her lips parted, and in that moment I felt my blood freeze. Her voice was a whisper, a chill that cut straight through me. "Take me home," she said. I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to hear it, but it echoed in my head, louder and louder. I had to get out of here. I had to stop. But I couldn't. Something had taken control of me. Something had drawn me into this nightmare, and now there was no escaping. The city, the heart of it, was turning into something else. It wasn't just a place anymore. It wasn't just an abandoned neighborhood. No, this was something darker, older. It was a place that had been left behind for a reason I wasn't sure I was ready to understand. The buildings towered over me now, their crumbling walls watching, waiting. The silence had settled into something worse, a weight pressing on me, on the car. The longer I drove, the tighter the grip around my chest became. And then, the strangest thing happened. As I drove deeper into the heart of this forgotten place, I saw something in the corner of my eye. Movement. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I saw it again. Shadows flickering just beyond the edges of the headlights. They weren't human, not in any way I understood. They were too tall, too thin, stretching unnaturally as they flitted between the broken buildings, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't losing my mind. They were there, watching, waiting. The fog seemed to thicken around me, swallowing the light, suffocating it. The buildings, once crumbling, now seemed to lean in closer, as if they were alive, pressing in on me. The streets had narrowed, the asphalt cracked and jagged. the shadows in the corners of my vision twisting and shifting like something out of a nightmare. I couldn't see the way out. I glanced at the woman in the mirror again, and I swear to you, she smiled. It wasn't a smile of comfort or reassurance. No, it was the kind of smile that makes your stomach twist, the kind that makes you realize that you're not in control anymore. And I realized, too late, that I hadn't been in control since I picked her up. She had been guiding me here all along, leading me to this place, to the forgotten heart of the city, where time had stopped and the past had been buried, never to be found again. And the deeper I went, the more I understood. This wasn't just a place she had wanted to visit. It was where she had died. It was where she had been trapped. And now, it was where I was too. The car jerked again, as if something had pulled us, into this place. I couldn't stop it. The road, the buildings, the fog, it was all pulling me in. And there was nothing I could do but drive deeper, deeper into the heart of the city's forgotten soul, deeper into the dark. The world shattered around me as the car veered off course, slamming into something, no, everything, in its path. The screech of tires, the groan of metal, and the sickening crunch of impact all happened in the span of a heartbeat. The airbag exploded in front of me, throwing me back against the seat with bone-crushing force, the taste of metal and blood filling my mouth. My head hit the steering wheel with such force that for a moment I thought I might lose consciousness. But I didn't. I couldn't. The world spun out of control, the car twisting, grinding, as if it were alive, thrashing to free itself from the grip of something unseen. The windows cracked, glass flying through the air like shards of a broken dream. I was flung around inside the cab, my body battered by the chaos of the crash. The car finally came to a stop, but the silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that presses in on you, thick and suffocating. A silence that makes you question whether the world outside still exists at all. The car was wrecked. The dashboard was cracked and bent. The seats pushed awkwardly back, and the air around me was thick with the smell of gasoline, burnt rubber, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something sour, something wrong. I felt dizzy, disoriented, my head still pounding from the impact. My hands were shaking as I reached for the door, desperate to escape the wreckage, desperate to get out of this nightmare. But as I tried to move, that's when I saw her. She hadn't moved. She was still sitting in the back seat, staring at me with those cold, unblinking eyes. Her face was as pale as death itself. Her lips twisted into a smile that wasn't right. There was no warmth to it, no kindness. It was the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl, that fills you with an unshakable dread, the kind that makes you know, in the deepest part of your gut, that this is not a person. Not anymore. I tried to force myself to move, to open the door, but my body felt like it was made of lead. The seatbelt was tight against my chest, and I could barely breathe, but I had to get out. I had to get out. My heart was racing, my breath shallow, my hands slipping on the door handle as I tried to yank it open. It wouldn't budge. The metal was bent, twisted from the impact, and I couldn't escape. I turned back to her, my chest tightening, my pulse thundering in my ears. She was still there, still smiling that same wrong smile, the shadows in the car growing deeper, darker around her. It was as though she was pulling the darkness toward her, feeding off it, growing stronger in the midst of it. I felt a cold rush of fear claw up my spine. I couldn't explain it, but the atmosphere in the car had shifted. It was heavier now, suffocating. The silence had taken on a presence of its own, thickening, pressing in from all sides. I could hear my heart pounding so loudly that it drowned out everything else, the sound of my breath filling the air like I was suffocating. Then it happened. a whisper. I couldn't tell if it was her voice or if it was coming from somewhere else, somewhere inside me. The words were faint at first, like a breeze brushing across my skin, but they grew louder, clearer, until they filled my head entirely. Take me home. The words were soft, cold, a command, not a request, a simple statement that made my blood run cold. I could feel the weight of those words pressing down on me, sinking into my chest like an anchor dragging me deeper into some dark abyss. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. I was paralyzed by her gaze, by the feeling that I was no longer in control of my own body. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She had become something else, something darker, something more powerful. I wanted to scream, I wanted to fight, to tear the door open, to run, but I couldn't. She had me trapped. The car had me trapped. This place had me trapped. I glanced around, but there was nothing to see. The world outside was a blur, a void. I was surrounded by darkness, the faint glow of the streetlights barely cutting through the fog, the buildings looming like silent giants in the distance. The city was gone, swallowed up by whatever had taken root here in this forgotten place. This place that shouldn't exist. This place that was never meant to be. And then, just as I thought I might lose myself completely to the horror of it, the headlights flickered. The engine sputtered, and the song began to play again. It was faint at first, so soft that I thought I might be imagining it. But it wasn't my imagination, it was real. The same haunting melody from before, the same twisted, distorted tune that had followed me, that had crept into my mind. The sound of a broken music box playing over and over again, its notes warped and eerie. I felt the cold seep deeper into my skin, into my bones, as the music filled the car. It wasn't just a song anymore, it was a warning, a cry, a demand. And I realized with terrifying clarity that this was it. This was my fate. There was no escape from this place, from her. The ride wasn't over. It had only just begun. "Take me home," she whispered again, her voice cutting through the music, through the fog, through the silence. And in that moment I knew. I wasn't just driving her to some forgotten part of town. No, I had driven myself straight into the heart of it, the city's abandoned heart. And I wasn't going anywhere. We were all trapped here, together, forever. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, everything was wrong. The world around me was a twisted version of itself, familiar but warped. The car was wrecked. The metal twisted in ways that didn't make sense, like something had clawed through the very fabric of reality itself. My head was spinning, my body aching from the crash. Blood trickled down from a gash on my forehead, and my chest felt like someone had punched me in the ribs, but none of that mattered. The only thing I could focus on was the stillness. It was suffocating. The silence had swallowed the world whole. I could feel it pressing in on me, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill the air, it closes it in around you, makes every breath feel like a struggle. I tried to move, tried to force myself to sit up, but the seatbelt was tight across my chest, pinning me in place. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the buckle, desperate to get free. The car was a wreck. Glass everywhere, the dashboard cracked, the seats twisted at strange angles. But none of that was important right now. I needed to get out. I needed to escape. But then, that's when I saw her. She was still there, the woman. The one who had been with me since the beginning. She hadn't moved an inch. Her face, pale, cold, empty, was exactly the same as it had been before the crash. Her eyes were locked onto me with that same unblinking stare, her expression unreadable. But there was something new, something darker in the air between us. I don't know how to explain it. but I could feel her presence in a way that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just that she was there. It was the feeling that she had always been there, that she was the one who had brought me to this place, that she was somehow part of this nightmare. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. The silence was so thick, so absolute, that I couldn't hear myself. It was as if the world had been silenced, as if I had been cast into some void where only the sound of my own thoughts remained. The air inside the car was freezing, colder than it had any right to be. It seeped into my bones, numbing me. My breath came in shallow gasps, visible in the cold air. But it wasn't just the cold that made my teeth chatter. It was the feeling that something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The car felt smaller now. The space between us had shrunk, like the walls were closing in. The woman in the back seat was still smiling. That smile. It wasn't comforting or reassuring. No, it was something worse. It was a smile that made my blood run cold, a smile that spoke of things I didn't understand. Things I didn't want to understand. "Take me home," she whispered. Her voice was so soft, so cold, that it seemed to crawl under my skin. The words cut through the thick silence like a blade, leaving a trail of ice in their wake. I didn't know what she meant by home. I didn't know where she was trying to go, or why she had chosen me, of all people, to take her there. But in that moment I understood something that chilled me to the bone. I wasn't driving her anywhere. She was driving me. The car jolted. I felt it in my gut, the sickening pull of gravity as if something had grabbed hold of us and dragged us down. The engine sputtered, the lights flickering on and off, weak and unreliable. My heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong with the car. It shouldn't have been running after the crash. Not with everything that had broken, but here it was, humming quietly beneath me. I turned to the woman in the back seat, my mind spinning with questions that I couldn't even begin to process. The fog outside was thick now, swirling around the wreckage like some kind of dark, sentient force, wrapping the car in its grip. I couldn't see past the glass of the window anymore. It was like the world had disappeared. There was nothing left. I reached for the door handle again, but it was useless. The door was jammed, the metal bent and twisted in ways that defied logic. I pounded on the window, but the glass was cracked, shattered, impossible to get through. I couldn't escape. I couldn't leave. I was trapped here, trapped with her. "Take me home," she repeated, her voice colder, sharper this time, a demand instead of a request. The words echoed in my head. The song. It started again, the song. That same eerie, haunting tune that had been playing in the back of my mind since the moment I picked her up. It was louder now, filling the space inside the car, winding its way through my thoughts. The sound wasn't just coming from the car, though. It was coming from inside me, from deep within my chest, like something had opened a door and let it pour in. I could feel my sanity slipping. It was like the walls between reality and whatever this was had started to collapse, and I was falling through. I looked back at her, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She was closer now. Her eyes, those empty, lifeless eyes, were fixed on mine, and the smile on her face grew wider, more knowing. It was the kind of smile that told me I was about to understand something I didn't want to understand. I couldn't move, I couldn't think. But then, just as the car's engine sputtered one last time, the headlights cut through the thick fog ahead. What I saw made my blood run cold. A figure, tall, dark, shrouded in shadows. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure moved, closer, closer, and I realized I knew what it was, or at least I knew what it wanted. I turned back to the woman, and in that moment I knew. I wasn't just the driver anymore. I wasn't just someone taking a passenger from point A to point B. No, I had become part of the story, part of the trap. The ride wasn't just a ride, it was a journey. A journey that had started long before I even knew what was happening, and one that I wasn't going to escape. The song played louder, and the world outside disappeared completely, swallowed by the fog, the darkness, the crash, the wreckage, the woman, the figure. They were all part of this now, and I was trapped in the middle of it, forced to follow the road wherever it led, even if it meant never escaping. The ride wasn't over. It had only just begun. The car jolted again, the engine sputtering and coughing, as if it were trying to break free from something holding it back, but there was no escaping, no way out, not now. I could feel the weight of it, the weight of everything closing in. The fog had thickened, swirling outside the car like a living thing, wrapping itself around us, pulling us deeper into the darkness. I wasn't even sure where the road had gone anymore. It had dissolved, just like everything else. Everything had been swallowed by the fog, by the blackness that seemed to stretch forever, pulling at the edges of reality. But I wasn't afraid, not anymore. I was numb, detached from it all, floating in this endless abyss. The only thing I could focus on was the woman. She was still there, I don't know how, but she was. She hadn't moved, hadn't shifted in her seat. Her face, pale and lifeless, stared at me from the rearview mirror. Her eyes, those eyes, were locked onto mine, unblinking, unyielding. She wasn't a person anymore, not in any real sense. She was something else. Something old and unseen, something I shouldn't have encountered, something that had been waiting for me, for this moment. And I had no choice. None at all. She was the driver now. "Take me home," she said again, her voice a whisper that didn't belong to this world. It chilled my bones. I couldn't respond. What was there to say? What could I say? Home. What did she mean by that? She wasn't going to a house. She wasn't going anywhere familiar. She wasn't even on a journey that had a destination in the way I understood it. No, she had led me to this place. The place between the living and the dead, where time had no meaning, where the fog was as thick as the dark abyss in my mind. And now I was trapped in it. Trapped with her. The road ahead had vanished, swallowed by the mist. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts along the edge of the car, but even they seemed unsure of where they were going. They were weak, dying, like everything else. The city had been left behind, abandoned, forgotten. I wasn't even sure where we were anymore. The world outside had ceased to exist the moment I picked her up. I turned the wheel, my hands moving almost of their own accord. The fog swallowed the headlights, and I knew that there was no turning back. I didn't want to turn back. The path ahead was the only thing left. My feet pushed the gas pedal down, but I wasn't driving. She was. She had always been the one in control. I glanced at her again, the woman in the back seat. Her eyes were colder now, darker. She wasn't smiling anymore. There was no expression at all. She was just waiting. Waiting for something to happen. Waiting for me to drive her to wherever it was she had to go. Wherever she needed to go. And then it hit me. I wasn't just driving her to some forgotten corner of the city. No, she wasn't a regular passenger, lost and needing a ride. She wasn't even a person anymore. She was something ancient, something that had been trapped in time, forgotten by the world. And I had picked her up. I had brought her here, to this place, to this road that didn't end. The fog outside thickened, pressing in on the windows, and I felt a strange pull, like the car was moving forward despite me, like I wasn't in control at all. I tried to stop, tried to slam my foot on the brake, but the car didn't slow. It kept moving forward, toward something I couldn't see, toward something that waited for me in the darkness. And then, just as I thought I might lose my mind, the headlights flickered one last time, and for the briefest moment I saw it. A figure. A shadow standing in the middle of the road. It wasn't human, it couldn't be. It was too tall, too wrong, its shape stretched unnaturally, its outline blurred by the fog. I slammed my foot on the brake, but the car didn't stop. It couldn't stop. I didn't know if it was the figure or the fog or something else entirely, but the world blurred again. The sound of the tires squealing on the wet road filled my ears, but it wasn't enough to drown out the song. That haunting, unrelenting melody that had been with me since the moment I picked her up. The woman's voice cut through the haze again. Take me home. But this time, I didn't need to ask where home was. I knew. She had always been leading me here, to this road, to this place where the city ended, where the living and the dead had collided. And I realized, too late, that I wasn't the one driving anymore. I was the one being driven. Driven to the place where roads don't matter, where time doesn't matter, where the world ceases to exist. The figure in the fog grew larger, its outline becoming more defined. It was waiting for us, waiting for me. I turned the wheel again, but it was useless. The car wasn't mine anymore. The road wasn't mine anymore. The woman was the driver now, and the only thing left to do was follow her wherever she led me. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The woman was gone. The back seat was empty. The car was empty. But I wasn't. And the fog? It was closing in. I was still driving, but not in the way you think. The journey was never over. Not for me, not for her. And now, the road had no end, only the endless, unfinished journey. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.